Right, we're working through the Sermon on the Mount at the moment. We've been in it for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and we're journeying with Jesus through some of his teachings about the way life really works. Like what is God's way of doing things? If God's culture, God's way of doing things started operating here on earth just like it does in heaven, then how would life operate? How do we live? And we've discovered like it looks quite different from our automatic way of living and operating. Things like we are to trust instead of worry and have anxiety. We are to love instead of living in lust. We are supposed to forgive instead of living with revenge in our hearts. We're supposed to have honesty of relationships instead of trying to manipulate relationships. Generosity instead of greed. Like, we've gone through so many different things over the past few months. And by the way, if you want to listen, you can hear them all on YouTube. And we've dug into a little bit every single week. But it's kind of this heart of, like, how was life really designed to be lived? Like, what happens if God's way of doing things really was fleshed out and started happening here on earth? And he's been describing it. And now we're kind of at the end of the sermon. He's gone through so many different things. And now at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he is now reflecting upon, hey, you've got a choice to make with how you live now. You've kind of heard a whole load of stuff about how Jesus is describing life to function and operate. And now he's like, guys, you've got a choice to make. So listen to this with me. This is the bit of Matthew chapter 7 we're going to look at today. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to ruin. And there are many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Okay, so he's bringing up this image here. Jesus loves to use images and pictures as he teaches. And he's got these two gates, we've got two roads, we've got one that is narrow and tight, and one that is broad and wide. Okay, it's quite a simple image for us to get our heads around. And in the ancient world, the cities that they had, most major cities would have had walls all around their city for defence. Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? You can't call up the police and the army to come and help you. So what you do is you build walls around your city, so if enemies came, you could all hide in the walls. But if you built walls all around your city, what do you need to get in and out of your city? You need gates or doors, don't you? So there would have been, in any city, and particularly in Jerusalem, there would have been some major, wide open gates, okay? Some huge gates that you can fling wide open. And in the everyday sort of day-to-day life, as you go about life, they're the main gates that you use. You come in and you go out these big main gates. It's where the traders are bringing their wares, the farmers are coming in, and then they're going back out, and they're selling the stuff and coming in and coming out. But then there would have also been a number of other gates around the city walls, but smaller ones. Ones that maybe you don't know about all of them, maybe you don't use them pretty regularly. Everyone knows about the big, wide, open gate, but not too many people know about some of those little ones. And they were narrower, and they took you on slightly different paths out of the city than the big ones. So if you were just kind of going about your everyday life without thinking about it, you know, like we do, we just kind of wake up and we kind of get on with stuff. Do you know the amount of times I leave my house, jump in the car, and I'm going to Tesco, and I just, without thinking, I drive straight past Tesco, come and pull up on the driveway here at the Beacon, and I sit there and I go in, I'm supposed to be at Tesco. Like, honestly, I do it like far too, like, I need to be checked out. I do it far too regularly for it to be healthy. The worst time ever, I can't even believe I actually did this, but I drove into the Beacon, thought, no, I need to be in Tesco. I drove back out and I drove home. I got onto the driveway at home and I thought, oh, I need to be in Tesco. And I had to drove, honestly, like I was even shocked at myself and embarrassed. But like, as you're going about life, sometimes you just do stuff without thinking. And there's automatic routes that you take when you're doing stuff without thinking. Now, if you're in Jerusalem and you want to leave the city, then you take the big, wide, automatic, huge door that's got the neon signs and all the signs pointing at it, the way that everyone else is going. That's the way you go. But if you were to pause and think about where you were going to go, and you were thinking, hey, what path do I actually want to travel on here? Where is it I want to get to here? Then you might opt to take one of the narrow gates with one of the footpaths, because you might decide that's a better route for me to go through. And it's this sort of image that Jesus brings to mind as he's talking about gates, okay? So there's 2 gates, 2 roads, one broad, massive and easy where all of the lights are pointing at, and one that is narrow and tight. And he says here, though, that the broad, massive, wide one, okay, the one that you just go to automatically without thinking, he says it leads to ruin. He says the one like the easy option one, the one that you just all the crowds go to, the one with the automatic doors and the neon sign above it, like it leads to ruin, he says. Now this word ruin, okay, it's got some cool little interesting stuff behind it, because the Bible was written in Hebrew and Greek, so sometimes when we find different words, it's like, oh, we get to do a bit of translation and try and figure out what it means. And this word ruin's got some interesting stuff behind it. In the Bible, it's used to talk about vases and perfumes, and we get to see how God uses it, how the Bible uses this word a little bit. So I've not got a vase with me, but I do have a mug, okay? And this mug has got a purpose, doesn't it? Okay? So the maker of this mug gave it a purpose. He's like, I'm going to make it a really good mug. And I do like these mugs, by the way. We bought a load of them for the beacon so that you guys can have decent... I hate it when you go to church and you get those little cups. Drives me mad. We had them when I first moved here, and I'm like, we're not having those little mugs anymore. We need big mugs if you're going to serve coffee in it. Somebody really thought through what size makes a good mug, and they made it, and they gave it a good handle. The purpose of this mug is to get you your tea, your coffee, your hot drink, and it's made with that in mind. It has a purpose, okay? But sometimes stuff gets... Did it not break? That was my dramatic moment. That was my dramatic moment. Okay, sometimes it gets broken. Now the Bible word for this would have been like ruined, okay? But this word ruined has got more than just broken, ruined in it. It's actually lost its purpose. Like it can't do what it was supposed to do. It's not able to perform the purpose, its meaning behind it. It's lost some of that. And that's all wrapped up in this word ruin. And it's the word that Jesus uses here to describe these choices in front of us. He's like, as you go through life, you're going to face some choices. And it's all the time, by the way, you're facing these choices. And there's going to be certain options and certain roads that are like wide and easy. You can just head down and without thinking. And he's saying, be really careful. Because if you head down those ways, it can lead to you losing the purpose, the meaning of why you were made. You can lose your humanity. As you do it, you get broken, get ruined. But then he says there's another way. There's a narrow road. And it's a bit harder to walk along the narrow road. It can be lonely, it can be unpopular, it can be difficult to figure out where it is and where it's leading. But he says that way leads to life. Now this makes a whole load more sense if you've just read through the whole Sermon on the Mount, okay? And some of you won't have done that because you've not been with us for weeks and weeks and weeks. But like, if I take you through some of the things that Jesus has just taught about in the Sermon on the Mount, each time there's a wide way and there's a narrow way. And each time as you look at it, you go, whoa, the wide way, man, it leads to ruin. And each time you look at it and you go, the narrow way, I can see how that's harder, but it leads to life. So one of the things he started talking about at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount was our anger, like the anger that's within our heart. Like, you know that reaction, that lunge that we have when we're hurt, when we're wounded by someone, that we just want to get back at them. We want revenge. It's a wide way. Anyone know, like, you felt this, yeah? You feel this. In fact, how many people feel this multiple times a day? This sort of lunge at people, okay? Raising kids, yep. That sort of raising kids does this quite a lot, I think. You have to hold yourself back quite a lot. This sort of instant reaction of, well, what they did that to me, so I'm going to lash out. I'm going to hit back and I'm going to take them down. They messed with the wrong person. That sort of reaction in our hearts and in our lives, like it comes up within us. Jesus is like, do you know what? That's a wide road, that reaction. You know, that really is a wide road. You see this? Like, it's the easy way to go. It's the way my emotions want to pull me. It's even the way maybe my mates pat me on the back and go, yeah, do you know what? You've got every right to get back at them. It's a wide road. It's a popular road to walk down, But Jesus started talking about a different way to live your life. A way of reconciling with your enemies. A way of forgiving your enemies. By the way, that's not a popular way. It's not an easy way to walk, like it's loads more tricky to walk in reconciliation and forgiveness than it is in anger and lashing out. It's a narrow path. Do you see the difference? A wide path and a narrow path. The narrow path is tricky to navigate. It takes some figuring out. But let me tell you, the narrow path is the way to life. Life in all of its fullness. Life as it was supposed to be. It's the way to life. Another time in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about our relationship with our possessions. He says, don't store up treasures on earth, but store up your treasures in heaven's stuff instead. He's like, when you focus on your stuff, your possessions, your money, your income, and that becomes something that grabs your heart, guys, it is the wide way. It's the wide way. You know, when we're like, oh, I've just got to accumulate more, I've got to store up more, I've got to make sure my pension pot's as big as possible, I've got to upgrade my gadgets constantly, I've got to make sure I keep up with them because they've got more than me, so I need more and I need to collect. That whole heart attitude that we have in our society today, it's the wide way. It's an easy way to walk. It's probably, without any thinking, it's just our automatic route to go down. It's a wide road to walk down. And Jesus is like, be careful. Leads to brokenness and ruin. Like you're going to lose, if you keep walking down that, you're going to lose some of the meaning and purpose that you've been made for. You're going to lose some of your human identity. But the other way of investing in the stuff of heaven, investing in the stuff that's going to last forever, the stuff of love, joy, peace, patience, generosity, goodness, kindness, all of that stuff, the stuff of God, when you invest in that, that's trickier, by the way. You don't automatically just do that. You've got to figure it out. You've got choices to make, and Jesus is like, it's a narrow way to walk. It's tricky to find that way. You've got to slow down and figure out how to walk on that path. It was just a couple of weeks ago, we looked at this passage that says, do not judge. When you look at this, why would you look at the speck in your brother's eye and ignore the plank in your own eye? He's like, why would you be a type of person that picks at the little speck in someone's eye, that gets in that heart of criticism, analysis of everybody else, sees everybody else's faults, and you're walking around with a massive plank in your eye, judging everybody else? It's like this massive, elaborate, cartoony image that Jesus gives. And he's like, do you know what? You know that heart of just judging others? Of like looking down upon other people, of thinking that my stuff that I'm dealing with is less than other people's stuff, like they're worse than I am. Like that sort of heart attitude, it's the wide way. It's the way that culture teaches us to go. It's easy to walk down. It's our gut reaction. It's our emotional response. It's a wide way. I tell you what, you keep on walking down that road, it leads to broken mugs. But there's a narrow way. And it leads to life. Like, instead of looking at the plank of wood in your brother's eye first, how about instead of looking at the speck in the other guy's eye, how about you check out your own stuff? You pause, before you correct other people, you pause and you do a heart check on your own stuff. And you say, hey, where am I at? Where's this response coming from? It's a slower, harder response. It's more painful for us to go through. It's not easy. It's a narrow way to walk. One more. At one point in the sermon, probably one of the toughest challenges that Jesus gives us, he says, do not worry. Do not worry, he says. And instead, we are to trust him for tomorrow. And we live in a time right now, guys, where worry and anxiety is our default operating system all the time. It is the normal way of life in our 21st century. We are anxious about money, anxious about your kids, anxious about your health, anxious about your future, anxious about the inflation rates in Uzbekistan for some reason. We read the news and we get anxious about it, and we've got stuff from the other side of the world and stuff that might happen or might not happen, stuff that used to happen, stuff that did happen, stuff that somebody you've never met even said, and it causes us to worry and have anxiety. It's our default operating system. It's a huge, wide road, and so many of us are marching down it. Does worry and anxiety, does it lead to life? I mean, many of us experimented with this in the practical, yeah? Many of us, we've lived in worry and anxiety. Is it leading to life? No. It leads to broken books. But there's another way. And it's a narrow way. It's difficult. You've got to kind of think about it and pause and take it slowly. And you decide, no, I'm gonna trust that I have a Father in heaven who wants good things for me. I'm going to trust that he knows what's coming up tomorrow and I don't. I'm going to go to sleep tonight, not because I've got everything figured out and I know how it's all going to work, but because I've got a Father who does know everything. And I'm going to trust him for tomorrow. I'm going to put his stuff first instead of my stuff. Guys, it's a narrow way. It's a harder way to walk, but it leads to life. Do you see some of this? You can go through every single teaching now in the Sermon on the Mount, and you're going to spot this. It's like Jesus gives you this to then interpret the rest of the sermon. There's a wide way, and there's a narrow way. And each time you're going to go, oh, that wide way, I see it. Like if I keep walking down that way, it's going to lead to destruction, to ruin, to brokenness, to me losing who I really am. But there's a narrow way that takes a choice. An intentional way. Like, are you going to choose this week? This week! In fact, as soon as you stand up and start talking to people, okay, you are going to enter into the complexity of life and human relationships. All of the stuff with kids, with the conversations with each other, with who's going to cook, how are you going to treat that person texts you that, this is happening, I know I'm worried about that, it's going to happen. All of the complexity of life is suddenly going to kick in as soon as I stop talking. What choices are you going to make? You're going to just throw yourself down the widest road because it's the way everyone else is going. It's the way you've always been taught to go. It's been the way our culture wants you to go. Or are you going to pause and take a slower, more difficult route, but I promise you this, it leads to life. By the way, alcoholics and drug addicts and anyone who's felt any sort of pull of addiction over their lives, which is most of us, by the way, they know this really well. If you want to get over alcoholism, that every time you feel the urge for a drink, what have you got to do? You can't just go, well, yeah, I'm feeling the urge for a drink, I'm going to go and get a drink. It's a wide way, it's massive, it seems like drink is everywhere and there's options everywhere to get a drink. That's the massive, wide way in front of me. But they know where it leads. It leads to brokenness, it leads to destruction, it leads to pain. But there's a narrow way and it's harder to walk. An alcoholic's journey is making that choice moment by moment. Every day I'm going to walk the narrow route. And it's harder and it takes more figuring out and it's tougher, it's a tougher route, but I am going to walk it. And I want you to kind of reflect today upon some of the decisions that you've got in front of you, some of the choices that you've got to make. Maybe there's some anger that's in your heart. Maybe there's some worry and anxiety that you've got going on. Maybe there's some stuff coming up later with people that's complicated and it's hard work. Maybe there's some people that you're looking down upon and you're like, what choice are you going to make? Are you going to throw yourself down the wide way that, I know it's tempting? Or are you going to pause today and choose the narrow, harder path? And what's really cool, guys, is you don't have to do this alone. You know the narrow path that you're going to walk? If you're going to walk it to life, like, you're not going to get far by yourself. But not long after this, in another gospel, Jesus says this. He says, I'm going to send you the Spirit of truth. And when he comes, he will guide you in all truth. Jesus wants you to walk in the ways of life. He doesn't want you to wait for heaven for that. He wants you to live in the ways of heaven right now. And so he gifts us the gift of the Holy Spirit to teach us, to guide us, to lead us in the ways of life. So let me pray for you. Band are going to come on. Now, Holy Spirit, I want to invite you now because I am highly aware how unqualified we are to be walking these narrow paths. Like as we look at some of this stuff, worry and anger and unforgiveness and judgmentalism and all this stuff that you brought up in the Sermon on the Mount, like it's a tough road to walk. But even as we just look at it and observe it, we can see it is the way to life. Life in all its fullness. Life as it was made to be. And so Jesus, we invite you, the giver of life, the author of life, to come and lead us in the ways of truth and life. Would you come and guide us? Come and fill us afresh this morning. Come and do life with us, so that as we enter into the complexity of human relationships and human life, each and every day, as we've got calls to make moment by moment between the wide way and the narrow way, Lord, would you guide us along your narrow path? Sustain us when it gets hard work. Draw community around us as it gets lonely. And bring to us some of the power of heaven and your life here on earth. Your blessing be over my brothers and sisters as they walk in your ways. Amen.